All right. Welcome, everybody. And I'm going to be talking about Toyota today. I'm going to be streaming from my home. I'm just learning about streaming here, so working on it. So I just want to welcome everybody. And as I've said, feel free to ask questions in the chat as I go through this presentation. And I'm excited to talk about Toyota. I think it's an interesting time, right? To look at Toyota. So why don't we get started? And I'm going to share my presentation here, as you can see. Going to switch my camera over to this one so that I can see it. So hopefully you can see that. And the question I have is Toyota versus electric vehicle extremists. Who's right? Toyota's taken a lot of heat these days for its strategy on electrical vehicles. So now what's interesting about Toyota is that if you were to buy the stock today, you'd get its future growth for free. Now, I'll talk about that later on in this presentation of why I say that. But this is Andrew Stotz of the Valuation Master Class. This is our Valuation Master Class case study. Let's get started. Remember, this is not investment advice or recommendation. And before we get started, just to say, I see Tristan Bailey says, hi, afternoon, good to see you. Welcome everybody on to this stream, and hopefully you get some value out of it. So this report's been created with the support of my Valuation Masterclass graduates, in this case, Momin and Pete, and also Chris. Now, the question is, is it the right time to buy right now? This is Toyota, and what we can see, I'm going to remove my video from this screen so you can see the share price. Also, I'm going to come back up on the screen here. So the question is it time to buy Toyota right now? And that's the question that I have. Now, let's look at this. Here's the answer to my question that I'm asking about Toyota. I value Toyota at about 2,509 Japanese yen, which is implying about a 40% upside. I'm deriving the target price from a DCF-based valuation using a WACC of 6.4 and a terminal growth rate of 1%. I'll also show you some multiple valuations that can give you some guidance there. So what are the highlights of this presentation? First, ICE. ICE stands for internal combustion engines. ICE vehicles are not going away, no matter how much, of course, people want them to go away for the environment. And this Toyota's perfectly placed to continue to provide those ICE vehicles. Also, Toyota's hybrid and hydrogen leadership and more EVs coming could prove the critics wrong. You see, a lot of people are banging on Toyota these days that they're not behind the EV revolution, but they're taking it a step at a time, and we'll look at that in more detail. And the third thing is negative sentiment is pressuring the price. But at 1x price to book, which is where it is right now, it might be time to buy. Now, there are some risks here. First is a failure to adapt to the industry trends, soaring raw material prices, and concentration of suppliers. So let's look at Toyota for just a second. Heads or tails, EVs, hybrids, or ICE. Ultimately, we're making a bet. Now, let's look at the background. Toyota is a world-leading Japanese automaker, and it also finances some of its customers through its finance arm. The company sells its vehicles in 200 countries and regions, with main markets being Japan, the US, Europe, and Asia. In 2022, the company produced about 10.6 million vehicles and topped the ranking of the world's largest car brands with a market share of around 11.5%. So let's get into the first story that I was talking about, and that is ICE vehicles are not going away, and that's providing ongoing revenue support to Toyota. So Toyota is the world's largest car manufacturer, and they've been a leader in alternative energy solutions such as hybrids and hydrogen-powered vehicles. The prior president has said that the company will not simply repeat the approach of other companies, Now, as an investor, I like that. I like companies that are trying to do something different. So I find that interesting. Uh, and also, uh, he in developing markets, South America, Asia, and one of our guests on the show right now, Hillary, is from Africa, and we can see that it could be decades away from having the infrastructure to implement a massive EV rollout. And Toyota's well positioned to grow with these markets. Look at Africa, look at Thailand as an example, where I am, and in Asia, you know, it's impossible to implement an electric vehicle scheme here. It's really only high end people that can afford it, and there's just not that many charging stations. So internal combustion engines are here for a long time. Now, in the developed countries like US and Europe, Japan, sure. Let's look at the second story that I think is interesting. Hybrid and hydrogen leadership and more EVs coming could prove critics wrong. Now, Toyota is a pioneer in mass production of hybrid technology, having rolled out its hybrid Prius model in 1997. Since then, it's sold more than 5 million of these Priuses. Currently, hybrids account for about 27% of total vehicle sales. Remember, there's a lot of Lexus and Toyota editions that are hybrid. And Toyota is really pushing ahead with hydrogen produced powered cars. Currently, it's selling the Mirai model right now, and there are now hydrogen powered cars out in the world. Now, there's not a lot of hydrogen charging stations, and that's one of the things that Toyota's got to figure out how to get over. Now, Toyota has done some partnerships with BMW, and I suspect they'll try to do more to get more people onto hydrogen. Hydrogen is an amazing source of power. It's safe, and it is not expensive, and it's definitely not polluting. And what's different about a hydrogen car, and this is kind of interesting. So let me just talk about this for a second. With a hydrogen car, you're actually producing the power that then is going to the battery. And so that's different from just producing the power at a power station and then filling up the battery. But, spend some time looking at videos about hybrids and people who are driving them right now. And these are hydrogen cars. And I think there is some possibility. It's not just a crazy idea. And for me, way I look at it is that there's promise to this technology. And as an investor, you could consider Toyota's hydrogen as an option value. Maybe it doesn't work. They've invested a lot in it, but that's already invested. But if you were a buyer of Toyota today, you would get a chance to potentially get the upside if hydrogen worked. For those that are older like us, I see Dave Buck right there. He's close to my age, and he knows that in the old days we looked at Sony and Betamax and those types of things, and one wins out over another. But I would argue that the hydrogen looks interesting. Now, let me just take a question. Hillary says electric vehicles infrastructure. We still don't have solid electric grid. Yeah, in Africa, many countries in Africa don't even have solid electric grid. Dave says, wow, we hardly hear about hydrogen in the news here in the United States. Well, exactly. But hydrogen is selling in California. I think as of right now, there's getting close to 100 hydrogen filling stations. And hydrogen filling, if there's a long line of cars filling up, hydrogen can take a little time. But if there's not a long line of cars building up, then hydrogen's about 5 minutes or so to fill up the tank. So hydrogen is an interesting one, and ultimately you're getting an option on that. Now, Toyota's not turning its back on EVs. They've recently announced their plans to invest about $70 billion in electrifying part of its fleets by 2030. So that is something that's, coming. Now, before we go back into the presentation, let me talk about the thing that I think is kind of interesting. Right now, the people who are really pressuring Toyota to do more electric vehicles, those people want Toyota to do electric. But I would say that given the instability of the electrical grids in America, we've seen blackouts in Texas. We've definitely seen blackouts in California and risks of that. Would you want a car that's all electric coming from the grid? Now, of course, if you can get electric from the sun, that would be fantastic. And some of those are trying to do that, like Tesla. But the point is that if you have a hybrid vehicle, you can deal with the situation when the energy is not flowing. Lee, great to see you. Yeah. And Hillary says, these people, yeah, that means ESG people. Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, good to see Dave. There's Dave. Yes, I am. Dave's about my age, close, getting close. And there's Lee. Good to see you. Yep. All right. So let's continue on. I'm going to go back into the presentation because I got more to show you here about it. My third point about Toyota is the negative sentiment is pressuring price. But at 1x price to book, it might be the time to buy. Now, the sector is unfavorable given recession fears as well. Investors doubts that Toyota's conventional EV policies, unconventional policy of focusing on hybrid and hydrogen, and they're worried about whether the company can protect its position. But I can tell you that the company has nearly 9 decades of success behind them. And so I would say that I wouldn't count Toyota out. It's a leading brand. And it's really the number one. As I say, if you were to rank by market cap, revenue, and employees in a composite score, they would definitely be number one. Now, the company's price to book value dropped below 1x price to book, which is 1 standard deviation below its long-term average. With an average net margin of about 7.8% over the past 5 years, Toyota is among the most profitable automobile companies in the world. Now, of course, we'll exclude Tesla from that. That's a very different competitor in a very different model, and it is a serious threat. Basically, Tesla has recently just produced close to 5 million cars, which is the number of hybrids that Toyota has produced over the time. So I believe that the negative sentiment may be too punishing and the stock deserves a re-rating. And I just mentioned for just a second that, okay, we've got a potential of a recession in the US. What underperforms in a recession? Consumer discretionary stocks like big purchases like cars and TVs, they get postponed. But this has been one of the most anticipated recessions in all of the recessions that we've seen. So you could argue that a lot of the fall in the share price in automakers is happening because of that. Now, Toyota's actually held up pretty well. In the past 12 months, Toyota's down about 25% versus GM and Ford, which are down close to 50. So it's an interesting one about the price to book right now. Let me just welcome everybody else who's on. Halima says, good to see you again, Andrew. Excellent. Great to see you too. Welcome. And let's see. John just came over to my house for coffee and a nice chat. I don't have enough technical knowledge about the vehicles, but it seems that hybrid is the best of both worlds. So why isn't it the most popular option? Well, I think that people feel like you're still relying on an internal combustion engine. So therefore, we need to go to electric fast. But I think that there's a measured approach from Toyota, and that's what they're trying to do. Momen is here. Momen's in the house. Free future growth. Well, let's talk about that. Let's continue on. I'm going to share my screen and go back into that. So those are the 3 stories about the company. Remember, also, I just want to tell you, you can download this chart deck for free. Just click to the link in the description in this video, and then you can download this whole valuation report. Well, first, let's look at the latest quarterly results. This is fiscal year 2023, and this is third quarter. And basically, Toyota's third quarter revenue was up 25%. It was massive. And operating profit grew about 22%. Of course, there are some cost rises that we're seeing in the company, which is hurting the margin just a bit. But overall, it was a very good period. Now, Alex has put in into the chat the link to this so you can download this. Tada says, long time no see, my boss. Yeah, it has been a while since we've seen you at our house. All right, let's continue. So what about the revenue structure? With 10.5 million cars sold in 2022, Toyota remained the largest car manufacturer in the world. The company produces vehicles under 4 brands, Daihatsu, Hino, Lexus, and the namesake Toyota. And the namesake Toyota is accounting for 85% of the total sales. And North America was the largest region in terms of revenue, as it represented 35% of total revenue. Now, though financial services are 7% of the total revenue, financial services are actually a pretty serious contributor because on a profit line, because the company is making money off of lending to its customers to borrow the money to buy the cars. And so that is typical for a car company to have some assets there. Actually, I can't see who this person is, but it says LinkedIn user, but I just want to say thank you for your message. Hi there. All right. So now in my 4 elements or FVMR that I look at, the bad news is Toyota doesn't look very strong. This, looking at fundamentals, it's okay. Now I'm comparing this to 2,300 non-financial companies in Japan. As far as valuation is concerned, it's kind of middle of the road. Momentum is a little bit under average because it's been a bit choppy. And then the risk is a little bit higher with the volatility that we see in the share price in particular, a little bit more debt. Now, the times interest earned is very high because the interest rate is super, super low. Now, this is my profitable growth triangle. I call it world-class benchmarking. And what this shows is that the company's performance is not that great. We can see that it's gone from a 5 in 2021, which is average, down to a 6 in 2022. And then in the past 12 months, down to a 7. So it has been deteriorating a bit in its profitability. That's got me a little bit worried. And the asset efficiency is a key thing for this car company. And let's now look at my forecast. So, okay, we did have a pretty strong 2022. And what I've done now is I've kept the profit flat for 3 years. So I wouldn't say that I'm overly aggressive in my forecast. So you can see flat for 4 years. The next thing is I am expecting a large amount. Now, this is in billions of yen. That means 13,463 billion yen and going up. So I expect some capex to come. And let's just look at the effective interest rate. This is why the times interest earned is so low, because the interest rate, of course, in Japan is so low. But I'm expecting that interest rate is going to come up to 0.5 for 2023, and then to 0.7 for 2024, and then up to 1% in 2025. It could come up faster, but right now that would be my expectation. And then the net profit margin I'm forecasting comes down a bit from 9.1, which really was a peak, down to about 7.8, 7.2. So I wouldn't say that I'm being overly aggressive. Remember, you can download this report for free by clicking the link in the description. So now let's look at consensus. Here, I looked at Toyota, VW, Mercedes, Ford, and BYD to try to understand what's happening. The green show the buys, and what we can see is that around 2/3 of analysts are bullish on Toyota, and only one analyst issued a sell recommendation. And the mean target price is about 2,180, which is about a 21% upside. And I would say that probably a lot of analysts are a bit concerned because of recession coming and the like. In general, analysts are most bullish on BYD, with 90% of analysts optimistic that the stock will outperform in the future, and the average upside accumulates to about 137. So if you want to see a nearly pure electric play in the automotive industry, see BYD in China, people are very positive on it. So also we can see US car giant Ford has the least favorable rating. 25% of analysts say it's a sell. And this brings up another point about Toyota that I think is interesting. And this point about Toyota that I think is interesting is that it's globally diversified. They have manufacturing facilities all around the world, and they're selling all around the world. That's not the case with Ford or GM. They don't have as much of an international presence. And the result of that is that if the US goes down, Toyota is definitely going to get hit. But they have other engines of growth in Asia and Africa and other places. So it's an important distinction. And the reason why someone like Ford may be viewed so negatively by the analysts right now. So what's interesting about Toyota is that if you buy today, you get its future growth for free. Okay, what do I mean by this? I'm going to tell you that when you look at the price to book, if you look at the price to book of a company, Basically, you're looking at the price in the stock market, let's just say the market cap or the market value of the company relative to the book value or the amount of equity that the company has in its balance sheet. And what you can see from that is that normally companies trade higher than book value, because we know book value is at historic cost, first of all. And so we know that actually book value is probably higher than that. That's different from, let's say, a bank where the book value is maybe at market price. So the point is that when you buy a company at 1x price to book, basically what you're paying for is the assets in place and the maintenance of that assets in place. If you pay over 1x price to book for a company or a market, basically the premium over book value that you're paying is for the future growth. But what I'm saying is that because Toyota's trading at 1x price to book or a little bit less, like a lot of the car companies, except for the ones that are really doing extremely well, like Tesla as an example, you're getting all of the future profits of Toyota for free. All right, so that's what I mean by that. Now, looking at the trailing price to book, Toyota currently trades one standard deviation below the its long-term average of about 1.2, and it's recently fallen to about 1x price to book. So it is getting cheap. On a forward 2024 price to book multiple, Toyota trades at a massive discount to consumer discretionary sector in Japan. The gap to Asia and world is even higher, which makes Toyota appear cheap. Its return on equity is expected to be slightly above the Japanese and the Asian sector of consumer discretionaries. And this leads Toyota to trade at a deep discount based on its price to book relative to ROE. So if we were to revalue Toyota to the 2024 price to book to ROE multiple of Japan, the company would deserve to trade at about 1.4x price to book. And this would lead to a value estimate of about 3,147 Japanese yen, or about a 75% upside from where the share price is right now. So based on that, Toyota seems to be massively undervalued. Now, we're going to use a DCF valuation, not the price to book, but I think this is a good check. Hillary asked, did it freeze only on me? That's possible. That's possible. I think Moment says, yeah, it's working for the rest of us. So hopefully yours will come back. So this is our forecast of the free cash flow of the company. And now let's look at the valuation. What you can see is that I assume a risk-free rate of 1% in the market equity risk premium for the Japanese market of about 10%. Toyota's been performing in line. So I'm going to assume a beta of 1. And I forecast a capital structure with about 44.6% debt to total capital, which is in line with the current level. And that results in a weighted average cost of capital and a discount rate that is the weighted average cost of capital of about 6.4%. And the result of that is combined with a 1% terminal growth rate is basically giving us our valuation and how we're getting to it. Now, our base case assumes a gross profit margin of about 18.2 until 2027. Resulting in a value of 2,509 based upon the free cash flow assumptions that we've just gone through. So I'm going to skip through that and just mention that the main risks are the failure to adopt to the industry trends. Also, of course, raw materials, whether that's cobalt, lithium, nickel, or other items that go into electric vehicles, and also costs related to supply chain, and also costs related to tech and chips and all that type of stuff, and shortage related to chips. And Toyota's notorious for having a concentration of suppliers. That concentration of suppliers was taught by one of the guys that did a lot of teaching with Toyota, and that is this guy. Dr. W. Edwards Deming was a big teacher of Toyota and teaching about quality. And he talked a lot about having a single supplier and the importance of that, because you build trust with that supplier. And then with that trust, you're able to develop and improve and invest together in the car or in whatever it is that you're producing. So let's wrap it up. What's interesting about Toyota is that if you buy today, you get its future growth for free. That's because you're paying about 1 times price to book. So Toyota versus EV extremists, who is right? That wraps up my presentation, and I'll take any questions that you may have or just chat as we go through the evening. Thanks for listening to that. And I see we got a message from Kabiru. Good to see you. Yep. Any questions about Toyota? I think that this valuation gives you an idea that Toyota looks reasonably cheap. Now, I wouldn't expect that Toyota is going to be a huge one to rock on the upside because they don't have as big of a story as, let's say, Tesla or something like that. But as far as being a solid global brand that has delivered solid profitability and solid performance, I would say that Toyota is up there. Also, if you look at the share price over a long period of time, you'll see the volatility in the share price is much, much lower than the other car companies. If you have any questions, let me know. I see a message from Matthew James Montgomery. Toyota is very popular in Africa. When I was in Cameroon, nearly all cars were Toyota. It's the same thing here in Thailand. I would say Toyota is the leader, the market share leader. And let me ask you, Matthew, is that are we going to see a lot of electrical infrastructure in Cameroon? It isn't going to happen anytime soon. People are going to be driving these internal combustion engines for a while. And Toyota is committed to the environment. Their internal combustion engines are getting more and more efficient and all of that. So Lee says, I like Toyota. Sounds good to me. Yeah, I would say it's kind of a solid one to consider for portfolio. And Waichia says, thank you, Dr. Stotch. You are very welcome. And John says, is Tesla greatly overvalued? Actually, I wouldn't say that Tesla is greatly overvalued now. What's interesting about Tesla right now is it's the ultimate example of economies of scale. Basically, what's happening with Tesla is that they're hitting the sales revenue sweet spot where revenue is rising and costs are not rising as much because the infrastructure and all of the fixed costs to produce the cars are already there. And so each car is bringing profit to the bottom line. And that's causing, so what that generally means is asset turnovers are rising. And so basically the asset turnover is rising and also the profit margin is rising. So you've got revenue rising and profit margin rising. This is the absolute sweet spot of what you want in a stock performance. So first, Tesla moved up considerably in anticipation of this point. And I would argue that if Tesla can keep up its strong revenue growth, it may not be extremely overvalued. That's what I would say. All right. Other questions? Let's see. Matthew says in Cameroon, they don't even have enough electricity to keep the lights on. And they use rolling blackouts at times of peak demand and in residential areas. Yeah, exactly. So the point is not only in Africa, but also other developing and emerging economies, Toyota is still going to be a major player with its internal combustion engines. So I see that Toyota looks interesting to me now, and that's why I wanted to come out and talk about it. Keep in mind that my students in the Valuation Master Class in the last group valued Toyota, and they also valued TSMC. It was very interesting, and that's why I felt like I wanted to do a little work on Toyota and discuss what I see going on. So I see an opportunity right now in Toyota. I want to thank everybody for joining, and I hope that if you've got other stocks that you'd like me to look at, feel free to let me know, and hopefully I'll see you in the next live stream. Have a great Monday.